He took everything from me, my freedom, my reputation, my company. I watched him smile while the judge read my sentence, confident that I was finished for good. But right before you think this is just another story about betrayal and loss, stay with me, because what he never knew is the only reason I survived what came next. Everyone believed I had no allies, no leverage, no future. That was the mistake. Watch closely, because the moment he thought he had won was the moment he triggered the one secret that would change everything. He took everything from me, except the secret that would change everything. The judge didn't look at me when he spoke. His eyes were fixed on the papers in front of him, as if my life were just another document to be stamped and filed away. 5 years, he said. Federal prison. That was it. No hesitation, no doubt. Behind me, someone let out a breath that almost sounded like relief. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I already knew who it was, my brother. He had been sitting there the entire trial. Calm, composed, dressed in a charcoal suit that I had bought him for our first investor pitch years ago. Back then, we were building something together. Or at least, that's what I believed. Now, he finally stood. Not to defend me, not to protest. Just to straighten his jacket and prepare to walk out a free man. The prosecutor gathered his files with a satisfied nod. The gallery murmured. Phones buzzed. Somewhere behind me, a journalist whispered my name as if it were already in the past tense. I kept my face still, because the moment I reacted, anger, fear, disbelief, would be the moment they knew I was broken, and I wasn't ready to give them that yet. They said I had embezzled millions from my own company, that I had falsified financial records, that I had moved money offshore under shell corporations tied directly to my name. The paper trail was flawless, too flawless. Every transaction time-stamped, every signature verified, every account linked back to me, except for one detail no one questioned. I had never touched the money, but someone else had. When the bailiff approached, he didn't bother lowering his voice. Hands behind your back. Cold steel closed around my wrists. The sound echoed louder in my head than it should have. That's when I finally looked up, not at the judge, not at the prosecutor, at my brother. Our eyes met for less than a second. He smiled. Not wide, not smug, just enough. The kind of smile that says, "You should have known better." As they led me away, flashes exploded from every direction. Cameras, headlines already forming. Tech founder sentenced, corporate fraud exposed, brother testifies against brother. He had testified against me. Not emotionally, not dramatically, clinically. He explained the systems we built together, the access levels, the internal controls. He spoke like an expert witness because he was one, and every word buried me deeper. By the time the prison gates closed behind me that night, the story was already finished for the world. I was guilty. He was the victim who did the right thing. The company was safe in his hands. That part mattered more than anyone admitted. Because Wardline Systems wasn't just a startup. It was a platform, infrastructure, government contracts, defense-adjacent software that moved quietly behind larger names, and now it was his. The first week inside passed in fragments: intake, processing, stripped identity, a number replacing my name. At night, lying on a thin mattress under fluorescent light, I replayed every conversation from the last year, every meeting, every decision where I had trusted him without question. The signs were there. The unexplained urgency, the insistence on restructuring finance internally, the way he had pushed for me to step back from day-to-day oversight. "You've earned it," he said back then. "Let me carry some weight." I let him. That was my real crime. On day 9, my lawyer came. He looked exhausted, older than he had a week ago. "They froze everything," he said quietly. "Accounts, assets, personal and corporate." I nodded. I expected that. "They're moving fast," he continued. "Your brother already filed motions to assume full executive control. Board approved it unanimously." Of course they did. Fear has a way of clarifying loyalties. He's also preparing a press appearance, my lawyer added, positioning himself as the responsible one, the man who saved the company. I leaned back against the cold metal chair. Let him, I said. My lawyer hesitated. You're not angry? I met his eyes. Anger makes noise. He didn't understand. Not yet. Before he left, I slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Memorize this, I said, then destroy it. He unfolded it slowly. There was only one name written on it, and a city. His eyebrows lifted. Are you sure? I held his gaze. He doesn't know I exist. That was the truth. My brother knew everything about me, my habits, my weaknesses, my routines. He knew how I thought inside a system because he helped build it. What he didn't know was where I came from. I wasn't supposed to use that name, not unless there was no other option. My mother had made that clear long ago. This world eats its own, she once told me. If you ever step into it, do it as yourself, not as someone's shadow. I respected that. Until now. 2 weeks later, the first transfer of company funds hit an offshore account. Not in my name. In his. I found out because someone inside still remembered who had written the original architecture. Someone who knew where logs hide when you think they're gone. Information has a way of leaking toward those who wait quietly, and I waited. I followed the routine, kept my head down, became invisible. From the outside, it looked like I had accepted my fate. Inside, something else was happening. Because the secret he didn't know, the one he never thought to check, was already moving. And once it started, it wouldn't stop. Power doesn't announce itself. It slips into rooms quietly, signs papers, smiles for cameras, and convinces the world that what just happened was inevitable. From inside the prison, I watched my brother become inevitable. The news reached me in pieces, a guard's radio, a folded newspaper left on a metal table. A headline glimpsed over someone's shoulder. Wardline system stabilized under new leadership. His face was everywhere, confident, measured, reassuring. He spoke about integrity, accountability, moving forward. He said my name once during the interview, carefully, like something fragile that might cut him if handled too roughly. This was painful, he said, but necessary. Necessary. The word echoed longer than it should have. He wore my watch during that interview, the one our mother gave me the day we signed our first government contract. I recognized the scratch on the bezel, the slight discoloration on the leather strap. He didn't even bother replacing it. That told me more than his words ever could. Inside, life settled into repetition. Count. Work detail. Count again. Silence punctuated by noise that meant nothing. That was the mistake most people made in places like this, believing silence meant emptiness. Silence is where systems reorganize. On the 14th day, my lawyer returned. This time, he didn't sit right away. They're restructuring, he said, aggressively. I raised an eyebrow. Too fast? He nodded. He's consolidating subsidiaries, dissolving redundancies, centralizing financial control. Investors love it. Of course they did. Speed looks like competence when no one asks what's being left behind. He's also moving to sell, my lawyer added. Not the whole company, just enough to cash out quietly while retaining control. That was interesting. My brother didn't like attention for long. He preferred leverage to applause. Who's the buyer? I asked. My lawyer hesitated. That's the thing. No one can trace it clearly. It's layered. Offshore funds, shell entities, complex ownership. I smiled faintly. So he had learned something from me after all. Do me a favor, I said. Don't fight any of it. Let it happen. My lawyer frowned. You realize how that sounds. I know exactly how it sounds, I replied. Trust me. He studied me for a long moment. You're certain about the name you gave me? Yes. And if he refuses to engage? He won't, I said. People like him don't refuse curiosity. That afternoon, I returned to my cell and waited. 3 days later, the first response came. Not directly. A law firm reached out to my lawyer with a simple request for confirmation. No demands, no threats, just interest. The name I had written down was not unknown. It was deliberately unlisted. A man whose presence didn't show up in headlines anymore because he no longer needed them. He moved capital the way generals move divisions. Quietly, decisively, without explanation. And he didn't like surprises, which meant my brother had already made a mistake. While the world celebrated his rise, cracks began to form beneath the surface, an audit delayed without explanation, a minor investor quietly withdrawing, a compliance officer resigning for personal reasons. Small things, but small things are how collapses begin. Inside prison, I became a ghost. I avoided alliances, declined favors, observed. People talk more freely when they think you're harmless. That's how I learned about the transfer. A guard with a loose mouth mentioned it offhand, bragging about his cousin's new consulting job overseas, a firm that had suddenly exploded with funding. The name caught my attention. It was one of the shell entities my brother had used to reroute funds. He was paying himself through layers he believed were invisible. But invisibility depends on who's looking. And someone was now looking very closely. That night, I slept better than I had since the trial. Because for the first time, I knew he felt safe. Safety makes people careless. A week later, my lawyer returned with something new in his eyes. Respect. He agreed to a meeting, he said. Private, discreet. When? I asked. Soon, he replied. But he has conditions. Of course he does. He doesn't want publicity. No names in writing. No recorded communication. I nodded. Tell him I accept. My lawyer paused. There's one more thing. He slid a photo across the table, my brother, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, familiar, comfortable. Who is she? I asked. Chief Financial Officer, my lawyer said. Hired last month. I studied the image. Too close, too informal. He was repeating the same pattern. Power, when unchallenged, doesn't innovate. It recycles behavior. Interesting choice, I murmured. That night, I wrote nothing. I simply waited, because the meeting wasn't for me, it was for the secret he had never prepared for. The man arrived 2 weeks later, no entourage, no drama, just presence. Even inside a prison visitation room, some people bend the air around them. He didn't sit right away. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once. You waited longer than I expected, he said. I had to be sure, I replied. That it was worth breaking the promise? He asked. I met his eyes. That it was necessary. He considered that. Then he sat. I read everything, he said calmly. Your case, the transactions, the restructuring. And? I asked. And your brother believes he won, he said, which means he already lost. I allowed myself a breath. What happens now? I asked. He leaned back slightly. Now, we observe. We let him finish building the trap. For whom? I asked. A thin smile crossed his face. For himself. As he stood to leave, he placed a single folder on the table. Don't open this yet, he said. Not until the timing is right. When will that be? I asked. He paused at the door. When he decides to sell. After he left, I stared at the folder without touching it because I understood something then that I hadn't before. This was no longer about clearing my name or reclaiming my company. It was about something far more permanent. Control. And my brother had no idea the ground beneath him was already shifting. My brother chose speed over caution. That decision would cost him everything. From the outside, the announcement looked like a victory lap, a strategic partial sale, new capital, global expansion. The press framed it as brilliance. Wardline Systems enters a new era. I read those words from a folded newspaper passed between cells like contraband hope. His photo sat beneath the headline, smiling with the calm assurance of a man who believed he had outrun consequence. He had finally decided to sell, not enough to lose control, just enough to feel untouchable. That's when the folder on my table started to matter. My lawyer came the next morning, eyes sharp, movements careful. He waited until the guard stepped away before speaking. He's opened a data room, he said quietly. Selected bidders only, confidential process. I leaned forward. Who made the list? My lawyer hesitated. That's the interesting part. One of the bidders appeared overnight. No public footprint, no media presence, but unlimited liquidity. I nodded once. He doesn't recognize the name, my lawyer added. But his CFO approved it immediately. Of course she did. The new CFO was efficient, intelligent, ambitious, and completely loyal to the wrong man. She believes this buyer is foreign, my lawyer continued, disguised through layers of holding companies. That's what it looks like, I agreed. And in reality? In reality, I said calmly, he's selling to someone who already knows every weakness in his structure. My lawyer studied me. You're certain he'll accept the terms? Yes, I replied. They'll be generous, almost insulting. That's how you lure arrogance. Inside the prison, time slowed. That was intentional. The more invisible I appeared, the more confidently my brother moved. He traveled, gave interviews, took credit for innovations he hadn't designed, and quietly, he signed documents he didn't fully read. The buyer's team asked precise questions, not about vision, not about culture, about compliance gaps, legacy code dependencies, internal authorization pathways, questions only someone who built the system would think to ask. My brother didn't notice. He delegated. Delegation is another form of trust. The first warning sign came when his CFO raised a concern. The valuation was unusually high. Above market, above logic. He thinks it's validation, my lawyer said during our next visit. Proof he was right all along. I smiled faintly. Men like him don't question gifts. They question resistance. The sale moved fast. Too fast. Inside the prison, I received a letter. No return address, no signature, just one line, written neatly. He accepted the structure. I read it twice, then folded the paper carefully. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from anxiety, from focus. Because the moment he signed the preliminary agreement, the leverage shifted permanently. The buyer didn't need to own the company yet, only access. 2 weeks later, the second letter arrived. He authorized temporary oversight rights. That was the mistake. Oversight becomes control when people assume it's temporary. My brother assumed. He was already planning his next move. New ventures, new visibility, a life beyond the company he believed he had conquered. He forgot the simplest rule of systems. The person who understands the architecture always wins. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday. Final review. Final signatures. My lawyer delivered the news with a measured tone. He wants it done quietly, he said. Private boardroom. Minimal press. Will he be there? I asked. Yes. And the CFO? She insisted. I closed my eyes briefly. Perfect. What about me? I asked. My lawyer hesitated. Officially, you don't exist in the transaction. Unofficially. You're listed as legal counsel for the buyer. I opened my eyes. Does he know? I asked. No, my lawyer replied. Your name appears only on the final disclosure page. I leaned back. He won't read that far, I said. He never does. The night before the meeting, the folder was returned to me. This time, I was told to open it. Inside were documents, timelines, transaction maps, not accusations, evidence, every unauthorized transfer, every masked withdrawal, every silent reroute of company funds into private accounts. My brother hadn't just framed me. He had replicated the crime, only more carelessly. I closed the folder slowly. The irony was almost elegant. He destroyed me using a system I built, then assumed ownership of it without understanding its limits. That morning, I was escorted out. Not freed, temporarily released for legal participation. A tailored suit waited for me. Navy blue, conservative, forgettable. Exactly what I needed. The boardroom sat high above the city, glass walls reflecting steel and sky. Power always prefers altitude. I arrived early, sat quietly, reviewed nothing. They entered together, my brother first, confident, relaxed, the CFO beside him, focused, alert. They didn't recognize me. Why would they? To them, I was just another consultant, another detail. The buyer's representatives followed, calm, impeccable. Everyone took their seats. The lead counsel spoke, pages turned, terms confirmed. The valuation drew smiles. Almost feels unfair, my brother joked lightly. No one laughed. They reached the final page. Signatures awaited. My brother picked up the pen. That was the moment. I spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically. You might want to read the disclosure. He paused, looked up, annoyed more than suspicious. Why? He asked. Because, I said evenly, you're about to sell controlling access to someone you already know. Silence. He glanced down, read the name. His face drained of color. Slowly he looked up at me. Recognition hit like delayed pain. You, he whispered. I met his eyes. Hello, I said. You won. The room froze, and for the first time since the trial, I saw something real in his expression. Fear. Fear is loud when it arrives suddenly. But the kind of fear that settles in slowly, the kind that realizes it's too late, is silent. My brother didn't speak. He stared at the page as if the words might rearrange themselves if he waited long enough. The pen hovered above the paper, suspended between habit and instinct. Across the table, no one rushed him. That was deliberate. Pressure reveals itself best when it isn't applied. You can't be serious, he said finally, forcing a breath into his lungs. This isn't possible. The lead counsel adjusted his glasses. Calm, neutral. The documentation is valid, he said. Ownership structure, oversight rights, and disclosure clauses were all agreed upon during preliminary review. My brother turned to the CFO. You saw this. She swallowed. I reviewed the valuation, the compliance, not the names, I finished for her gently. She looked at me then, really looked. And in that moment, I knew she understood. Not everything, but enough. This is a setup, my brother snapped, his composure cracking at the edges. You manipulated the process, I shook my head once. No, you designed the process. I just let you finish it. The room remained still, glass walls, city below. No witnesses. Power prefers privacy when it changes hands. You're in prison, he said suddenly, grasping for ground. You can't do this. You don't have standing. The lead counsel answered before I could. He does, he said. Provisional release for legal participation was granted under full compliance. My brother's eyes flicked back to me. You planned this, he said. Yes, I replied. His jaw tightened. For how long? I considered the question. Longer than you think, I said. Shorter than you deserved. The CFO stood slowly. If this is true, she said carefully, then the sale transfers operational authority immediately. It does, the counsel confirmed. She looked between us, calculating. Then she sat back down. That was her choice. And it told me everything. My brother pushed his chair back slightly. Not to leave, just to create space. This won't hold, he said. Even if this goes through the board has already been notified, the counsel interrupted, and informed of your personal financial transfers. The color drained further from his face. What transfers? He asked, too quickly. I slid the folder across the table. It made a soft sound when it landed, a sound louder than shouting. He didn't open it. He didn't need to, because he already knew what was inside. That money, I said calmly, was never invisible. It was just ignored, by people who trusted you. Silence stretched. You framed me, I continued. Then you repeated the same crime with less discipline. His voice dropped. You were supposed to disappear. I nodded. That was the plan. And you didn't. No, I said. I adapted. The lead counsel cleared his throat. If we can proceed? My brother laughed suddenly, a short, sharp sound. You think this ends here? He said, eyes locked on mine. You think taking the company fixes what you are? I leaned forward slightly. No, I said. It fixes what you did. He stood. Security didn't move. They didn't need to. You always thought you were smarter, he said quietly. That you saw the whole board. I met his gaze. I built the board. That broke him. Not outwardly, but something fractured behind his eyes. He looked at the CFO again. "We can fight this." She didn't respond. "This is coercion." The counsel's voice was flat. "This is consequence." My brother exhaled slowly, then nodded once. "Fine," he said. "Enjoy it." He signed. The pen moved. The final page closed. And just like that, the company changed hands. Not with applause. Not with headlines. With ink. Security escorted him out, not forcefully. Just enough to remind him he no longer controlled the room. As the door closed behind him, the CFO remained seated. She looked at me. "What happens now?" I studied her for a moment. "Now," I said, "we stabilize." "And him?" she asked. "That depends," I replied, "on how quiet he stays." The meeting ended efficiently. No celebration, no speeches. Power doesn't need ceremony when it's secure. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Inside, everything had shifted. Later that evening, back in the holding area, my lawyer approached me. "It's done," he said. "Yes," I replied. "And the charges?" he asked. "But
Soon.
not yet," I said. He frowned. "Why wait?" "Because," I said calmly, "he still believes this is just business. The next move wouldn't be." That night I received one last message. A single sentence. "He's panicking." I closed my eyes. Because panic makes people loud, and loud people make mistakes that finally surface the truth. Silence protects you only if you know how to live inside it. My brother didn't. The first mistake came 48 hours after the sale closed. He called, not his lawyer, not the board. Me. The number flashed on the screen while I sat alone in a temporary office overlooking the city, the same skyline he used to admire from a different angle. I let it ring. Twice. Then I answered. "You think you've won?" he said immediately, skipping every pretense. "No," I replied calmly. "I think you're unraveling." A sharp breath. "You can't prove anything." I leaned back in the chair. "I don't need to. You already did." He laughed. Too fast, too loud. "This is leverage. That's all. You don't want a public war." "You're right," I said. "I don't." That confused him. Silence stretched between us. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want you to stop," I said. "No statements, no interviews, no moves. And if I don't?" "Then you keep talking," I said. "And every word helps me." The line went dead. Within hours, he did exactly what I expected. He talked. First to his lawyer, then to a former investor, then, fatally, to someone he assumed was still loyal. But loyalty changes when power does. By the end of the week, internal messages began surfacing. Not leaks, confessions disguised as explanations, emails where he justified transfers, texts where he reassured partners, voice notes where his certainty cracked into urgency. None of them were illegal on their own. Together they formed a pattern. Patterns are admissible. The board called an emergency session. Not about me. About him. My presence was not announced. I joined remotely, camera off, voice silent. Let them speak. Fear has a rhythm. It speeds up language, repeats ideas, over-explains motives. My brother did all three. "This is being misinterpreted," he said. "You have to understand the pressure." A board member interrupted. "Pressure doesn't authorize personal enrichment." "I didn't enrich myself," he snapped. "I protected the company." That was the sentence. The one that mattered. The compliance officer asked quietly, "Then why were the funds routed through private entities you controlled?" Silence. Heavy. He tried to recover. That was temporary. Temporary theft is still theft. By the time the call ended, the board had voted. Independent investigation, full forensic audit, immediate suspension of his remaining privileges. He was out, not arrested. Not charged, just removed. Which hurt more, because removal implies replacement. That night, I stood alone in the office and watched the city lights come on one by one. Power rarely collapses all at once. It erodes. The second mistake came 3 days later. He contacted the press, anonymous sources, carefully worded statements. He framed himself as the victim of a hostile takeover. A betrayal by faceless investors. A brother exploiting a technicality. It almost worked. Almost. Until the documents surfaced. Not everything. Just enough. A timeline. A redacted report. A confirmation that the investigation existed. The narrative shifted. Doubt entered. Doubt is lethal to credibility. He began posting. Late at night. Erratic. Defensive. That was the third mistake. People don't trust desperation. They recognize it. By the end of the month, the authorities made contact. Not aggressively. Formally, my lawyer handled it. I stayed invisible. Because this was no longer about confrontation. It was about allowing the system to do what it was designed to do once the truth was unavoidable. The day they detained him, there were no cameras, no spectacle. Just a quiet escort from his apartment lobby. That felt right. I was informed an hour later. I closed my eyes, not in relief, in confirmation. Because the secret that changed everything was never about revenge. It was about patience. That evening I visited my mother. She hadn't asked questions during all of this. She never did. She poured tea, sat across from me, studied my face. "It's finished," she said. "Almost," I replied. She nodded slowly. "Did you use his name?" "No," I said. "I didn't need to." A faint smile crossed her lips. "Good," she said. "Names are heavy. They change how people see you." She was right. The next morning, my lawyer called. "They're reopening your case," he said. Quietly, I looked out the window. "How long?" "Months," he replied. "But the direction is clear." But justice moves slowly. By the end of the week, the board reinstated my position. No announcement, no press release. Just an internal memo. I returned to the company without ceremony. Some people avoided eye contact. Others nodded respectfully. A few smiled, relieved. The CFO approached me after the first meeting. "You could have destroyed him publicly," she said. "Yes," I replied. "Why didn't you?" I considered the question. "Because," I said, "public destruction is temporary. Consequences are permanent." She nodded. That night, alone again, I opened the final file. The one I had never shared. The one with the name. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed it. Some secrets don't need to be revealed. They only need to exist. The courtroom felt smaller the second time. Same wood, same seal, same flag behind the judge, different energy. I stood where I once sat. This time, no cuffs. No cameras. No whispers. The prosecutor spoke carefully, as if every word had weight. New evidence, reopened investigation, material inconsistencies in the original case. They didn't say my brother's name. They didn't need to. The judge listened, asked 2 questions, then 1 sentence. Charges dismissed. That was all. No apology, no drama. Justice doesn't apologize, it corrects. Outside, reporters waited. I didn't stop. I had already learned the cost of explaining myself to people who weren't there when it mattered. The company stabilized quickly after that. Not because of me, because fear was gone. Systems run better when people stop protecting lies. My name was restored internally. Quietly, contracts resumed. Partnerships reactivated. The board asked if I wanted a public return. I declined. Power doesn't need to reintroduce itself. My brother never testified. He took a plea. Limited statements. No public defense. He aged quickly after that, not physically, psychologically. People who live by control collapse when they lose narrative authority. I didn't visit him. There was nothing left to say. Months later, I received a letter. No threats, no accusations. Just a question written in uneven handwriting. Was it always like this? I folded the paper and placed it in a drawer. Some questions don't deserve answers. The secret remained untouched, not because it lacked power, because it had already done its work. One evening, I stood alone in the office after everyone had left. The city lights reflected off the glass walls. The same view, the same altitude. Different meaning. The man who once asked me why I didn't destroy him publicly had been right. I could have. But destruction is loud, and loud things fade. Silence, when it's earned, lasts. I turned off the lights and walked out. The secret stayed with me, not as a weapon, but as proof. Proof that what truly changes everything is not revenge, not exposure, not victory. It's knowing who you are, and never needing to explain it.